So I'm looking for new products for athletes all the time. Come across real food solutions which are hard to implement, food safety, GI tolerance, getting enough calories in without getting too much actual bulk in food. All big issues, making sure we don't get too much protein and fat when we're trying to get all the carbohydrates, easy to digest, low fiber, you name it. There's all these solutions for ultra endurance athletes or endurance athletes in general that are hard to manage. I found one, and this is not a hit piece because I actually utilize their products quite a bit. It's Spring Energy, and I like the Canterbury, the vegan, but that's not what I'm talking about at the moment. Canterbury was what I came looking for, was a real food solution inside a packet. What I ended up finding, and that's what was the preface for this video right now, was the Speednut with caffeine and Speednut with hemp oil. I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool, but what is that? So if you open it up, I'm always looking at nutrition. So if you're looking for something to use during any one of your events or your training, like the nutrition facts are incredibly important. And I have a saying: low fat, low fiber, low to no protein, easy to digest, as wide as you can get. It's a pretty good solid rule for choosing food for training and endurance, or especially any type of activity, to be honest with you. But this has 19 grams of fat. Check it out, right? So that's kind of a lot. It doesn't fit into that rule. And I'm like, what's the big deal with this? Like, okay, they got raspberries and strawberries and basmati rice. Okay, awesome. And then they go ahead and they add in all this fat. One of my problems with a lot of the other products in the market is like, God, why does it have so much fiber? Why does it have so much fat? What's going on with all this protein? Like, you're asking your body to digest all of this while it's working over a long period of time. And we're talking ultra endurance and even some marathons for people who, take 5 to 6 hours to complete. That's a long time on the gut. The gut starts to break down. And fat doesn't make it any easier. So I'm looking at this going, what's the white paper? Well, why did they do this? Who created this and why? I emailed Spring Energy. I sent them a thing on their webpage, an inquiry like, hey, look, this is what I want to talk about. What's the nutrition evidence behind this? Crickets, got nothing. So again, I'm not saying that Spring Energy is a bad product. In fact, I recommend the Canterbury. I like the real food aspect, but I cannot get behind this particular product, the Speednut, at all. So if you scroll down and you read, you're like, okay, so what are you doing? So Cody Reed, clearly an amazing guy. He's eating Nutella and sucking down Speednuts. But is he really? And so 250 calories with 50 milligrams caffeine. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And then here he is doing Western states. Yeah, okay, great. So why? Why did they create this, and why did they think this was good if most of the evidence shows us that fat in the GI system during endurance exercise or any exercise creates GI distress? It doesn't make any sense. And I'm glad Cody Reed can do it, which is awesome, but the trickle-down theory from amazing people to the average usually doesn't work very well. And one of the things that Spring Energy notes is the specific use of this MCT oils, medium chain triglycerides. Let me see, is that in this right here? Speednut with caffeine. Let me see. Major challenge, step forward, Cody Reed, super nutrition, Speednut. Okay, fatty acids, composition, a unique composition of medium chain fatty acids and carbohydrates. So what's the deal behind MCTs? MCTs are supposed to be easier to digest during exercise and be a readily source of fuel versus the stored fat we've already got, or let's say longer chain saturated fats. But if I went and looked for evidence to find this, and I did because it's what I do, right? I'm looking for things like this: association of gastrointestinal distress with ultramarathoners and ultramarathoners with a race diet. And I found this article. I'm like, okay, let me read this. Here's what they say. One second. Conclusion for this article of 2013. A race diet with a higher percentage of fat and higher intake of fluid may protect the ultramarathoner from GI distress. One article in 2013. It's one article that says it may. It's okay. So I went through, took a look at some of the information, trying to figure out, does this make any sense to me? And when I take their own calculations, actually, let me go back. Let me go back one. Let me show you what we're looking at. So I scroll down, and here are their charts for energy with and without distress. So how many kcals do they take per kilogram per hour? Carbohydrates, the fat, proteins, and the fluid. So they took all of this intake for their 15 athletes, I think, that signed up for the study. And this is what they found. So I think the N is important. I believe the N was 15 in the study. It's not very many of the people who finished and the people who didn't. So I went into Excel and I took a look at these numbers, like, okay, if all of the stuff I've ever read say fat, it is not good for GI and not good for gastric emptying. It actually promotes satiety and fullness, which isn't great when we're trying to get a lot of calories in during ultra endurance or endurance events. It just doesn't sit well, right? And so went and found an article. This is the stuff they said. You saw what the conclusion was, that higher fat, higher fluid may protect because those people finished. All right. So if I take a look here in Excel, the kcal per kilogram per hour. Okay, so how much energy do they get per kilogram per hour without GI distress? They had 3.4 grams per kilogram. If they did have GI distress, it was 2.3. The difference is 1.1, and that kind of makes sense. If you have GI distress, you're not going to take in as much. Okay, so they had 1 kcal less if they had GI distress per kilogram per hour. You're like, that doesn't make a big deal, but let's do the math because it actually is. Right, so for a 150-pound athlete weighing 68 kilograms, the kcals per hour was about 75 difference. Right, so for every hour, that particular person who had in GI distress had 75 kcals less. Now, this was a 100-mile event, so you take that 75 and you multiply it out by all of the time. Over the duration of the race, they would have had 1,600 fewer calories. Okay, that's a big deal, right? And so I'm going to scroll down. And we're going to take a look at the conclusions. I'm going to read it to you again. The conclusions of that article was a race diet with higher percentage fat and higher in rates of fat and fluid may protect ultramarathoners from GI distress. Now, they do state that these associations do not indicate cause and effect, which is good. The problem with that is people will look for studies to substantiate why that spring energy was useful. I'm like, oh, well, they said, but no, they didn't really say they made an association. And interestingly enough, take a look at below the black bar. If I go without GI distress, okay, fat per kilogram per hour, 0.06 grams per kilogram. Now, if they had GI distress, they took in 50% of that, 0.03. Okay, so that's clear. They took in more fat if they didn't have GI distress. Not much, but they did. Okay, that's not very much. Now, fluid kilograms per hour. It took in 11 to 6, about 50% more fluid. Okay, makes sense. You have fluid issues, GI distress, you're not taking in, you're not well hydrated. You're not well hydrated, you don't have gastric emptying, so you slow down what's moving through your digestive system, so you're getting poor hydration, you'll get dehydrated, you're not getting the fuel. This big snowball of, oh shit, bad things are going to happen, which as a sports dietitian, how I help people manage so this stuff doesn't occur. Now, they could have equally said, right, that higher percentages of protein may protect against GI distress in ultra endurance events, because if you take a look at this number, the protein per kilogram per hour is in fact higher in those who didn't have GI distress. Now, I'm not saying that the 0.07 to 0.05 is like even clinically significant. It's probably not statistically significant. Well, they can show that this was definitely higher protein intake, but they chose not to. They chose to say that fat and fluid may protect, but they could have equally said that higher protein does. So you see where we get into making these associations? It's problematic. Then we take a look at the carbohydrates per kilogram per hour with and without GI distress overall, and we've already discussed that. So they did take in fewer carbohydrates, and it makes sense. So you had less GI distress if you happen to take in more fat, maybe. But because carbohydrates are decreased, fluid was decreased, protein was decreased, and fats were decreased, it makes sense that everything would be decreased. You have problem eating because you have gastrointestinal distress during your event. So I don't know if this particular article points towards this particular product being of any use. And everything that I have from Mendeley, or all of my research actually, shows me the exact opposite. So why am I talking about this? Because you did some great studies on MCT oils. Like, hey, does this really work? And they did find that medium chain triglycerides do get used as energy more rapidly, which was cool. The problem was that it only impacted or became useful for performance if they took this large amount, like 70 or 80 grams. The problem is the body doesn't handle that much, right? People got GI distress taking too much MCTs. Now, why am I talking about MCTs? Because MCTs is what they said specially formulated in this Speednut from Spring Energy. So let's talk about this. So if I say, let me go up to the top here and let's read. So MCTs do not have disadvantages and are rapidly oxidized. They don't have the same disadvantages of being a slow fuel source as other fats. That's great. However, they cause GI distress. So let's read that. Contribution of MCT to energy expenditure is only small because they can only be digested in small amounts before they fuck up your stomach. Okay, so that's probably not a supplement that I want to take. So a high-fat thing with MCTs, don't know how much they're in there. And if I relied solely on this because somebody told me that fat and MCTs were good, and I buy a bunch of these and I'm sucking them down, am I creating a GI issue? Very much potentially, I think you could. So let's see, fat supplementation during exercise is usually regarded as undesirable, causes GI distress. In contrast to carbohydrates, nutritional fats reach circulation only slowly because they are potent inhibitors of gastric emptying. Well, gastric emptying is the rate at which things leave your stomach into your small intestine so they can be absorbed. Fluid, food, energy, all the things you need. You delay gastric emptying, you delay energy. Okay, and I do believe there was actually some number that it took a couple hours for MCTs to actually get into circulation. Let me see if I can find that. Oh, well, let me actually finish reading this one. So furthermore, the digestion of the gut and absorption of fat also rather slow the process compared to absorption of carbohydrates. So we know that we don't get fats as quickly in to the system for energy. Now you're like, well, hey, this is an ultra marathon. It's going to last 20 something hours. You're in a 50K, 5, 6, 7 hours. You're like, yeah, but if you're taking a lot of them or you took a lot before, they might not even hit you or even be of use. And if you've been taking them a lot over, let's say, an 18 or 20 hour race, and now you've overwhelmed your GI system, you weren't even getting any benefit for the first few hours. You can see how this big ball of like, there's not a lot of science behind this product. But, you know, somebody famous did it and they ate Nutella and it worked for them and now they want you to do it. But I don't. I want you to think about what you're buying before you start sucking this stuff down. So then here, let's read the end. Long chain, this is the top left right here. Long chain dietary fatty acids enter the blood 3 to 4 hours after ingestion. So that was the point that I made, was the long chain. Summing it up, the maximal amount of oral MCTs that can be tolerated in the GI is about 30 grams. And this limited the contribution of oral MCT to total energy expenditure to values between 3 and 7%. All right, I mean, maybe on the pointy end, if you're going to win Western states, that might be useful, but I don't know. I guess my point is that the average person is going to buy these and think that this is awesome, more is better, take a ton, and it's going to have the opposite. So maybe you should inject one Speednut into your entire race, or maybe one every 6 hours. Not sure, I haven't tested it, but based on what I'm reading from some of the seminal work on MCTs and fat and the GI system for exercise that everyone uses as citations in all of their journals, like this 1998 by Newton Group is a big deal. And the one where we went back and tested MCTs to reduplicate the benefits of MCT and found that no, like we can't do this. We have to give them less. That makes a difference. Right? So what am I getting at total? I'm getting at, I think Spring Energy has some awesome products, and I'm not exactly sure that that's one of them. I think if you look at Spring Energy, which I do recommend, I think the Canterbury is awesome, not because it's vegan, by the way, but because it's real food. And I do believe in real food when possible, to some extent, mixed into a layered fueling process is great. I don't believe in one simple thing for the entire race. You don't want to rely on that. You do want to use your gut. I think it's incredibly important, and overwhelming it with gels and goos and hydrogels and all this fancy stuff just going to cause problems in the end. Like our gut wasn't meant to do that. And we see that because people blow up at hour 5, 6, and 7 and all these races, even pros. They just get destroyed by their gut. We're not quite sure why. I do believe because it's a lot of products that are being misrepresented or not well utilized. Not a lot of thought process between how they're using them and why. So this isn't a hit piece against spring. I recommend the Canterbury all the time as a layered fueling process. What I don't recommend at the moment are these Speednuts because the science isn't there. And what got me started on this completely was, what the hell? Like, why so much fat? That's crazy. That's the exact opposite, the antithesis of everything that we read and see in the literature when we're trying to put together good fueling plans for our endurance athletes. Oh, that's just something that I do every day. Welcome to Sports Dietetics. Athletes call me up, and it was a day in my life. And I wanted to share this with you, plus the type of research that goes into my decision making when I'm trying to find a product for an athlete and make it sure that it works. I do this because it's fun and hope you learned something. Smash the like button, friend, follow, subscribe, and comment so I know you like it too. Thanks.